Hey class, this is week 2 and we are going to explore elements of art, and we'll be using that in our next assignment. So I'm going to just discuss this briefly. I don't want to, spend more than, 8 to 10 minutes on this. I think you could go back and look at it a little more thoroughly, but I'm going to go through it very quickly. I think some of you may have studied elements of art, maybe you haven't, but I just want to reinforce it a little bit and talk a little bit about how important some of these things like line, color, texture, shape, form, value, and space can help in making art for your own purposes. So we'll start here with line. Um, this is a composition or a photograph by Picasso. He basically took a flashlight and drew a human figure, and then that kind of what that does is it illustrates how a moving dot becomes a line. All right, so a line can be that simple and that important in a composition. It can be very complicated, it can be very simple. And these two pieces here, one by Sol LeWitt, the other by Jackson Pollock, we're looking at compositions that are either very stark and rigid and cold and mathematical, whereas in Sol LeWitt's and in Jackson Pollock's we're seeing things that are fluid and thick and thin and emotional and much more human, I guess, is another way of looking at it. Here we have a ship that is frozen in ice, and it is constructed of mostly lines. We're seeing a very complicated kind of grid work of lines, thick lines, thin lines. It's very active, very busy. So line can make your eye move around quite a bit. Just like these two, your eyes are very busy and they don't stop. So line can help that. And same with this piece here. We got the raft of Medusa, and this is definitely a line, but you don't see the line. It's a line that your eye follows from the left lower corner of the piece up through the top right, just with a kind of a pile of human bodies. And that's like an invisible line. That's what we call implied line. Value quite often is described as either kind of the relative degree of lightness and darkness. And in this case, it's black and white. But colors can be described as value as well. Like yellow can be quite a bit lighter in value than dark blue. Here's a rendition of Guernica. This isn't Guernica, but it's another artist that explored kind of the same idea. It's what we call an appropriation. Taking a painting or an image from history, perhaps, and changing it a little bit. But here we have what we call an achromatic or monochromatic composition. It's all dark or all gray. There's no color. That's achromatic. Monochromatic can be color, but all one color. Mono being one. So value contrast is the degrees of difference between the different shades of gray. So that's kind of a nice thing to do in a piece, is have a really nice diverse grays and blacks and whites. It makes a more interesting composition rather than having one value or very similar values. Shirin Neshat, this is a photograph that kind of has this, not only is it a contrast between black and white, but it's men, women. There's this kind of emotional contrast, There's this very stark division between the two. It's a pretty powerful image. Color terminology, we'll talk a bit about that. Spectrum is just like the bands of light as we see in science. Light is made up of the colors of the rainbow, and as they are absorbed into an object, the ones that bounce off mix together and create the color of the object. So an apple, everything's absorbed into that red apple, and everything comes back off and reflects that you see is the red. And that's how color is perceived by our eye. Primary is the color, the red, yellow, blue. We can't mix those and make them by combining any other colors. Secondaries are made with primaries, and tertiaries are made with secondaries. So when we look at the color wheel, it's organized in that way. And the ones being primaries, 2 secondaries, and 3 being tertiaries. And it's organized this way so we can see the warms. Right here we have the warm colors, the cool colors. We can look at complementaries, and also analogous. So we can create different color schemes by the way things are organized in the color wheel, which can make kind of more interesting compositions if you really think about color a little more closely than just randomly thrown colors together. Here we have a Paul Cézanne painting, and this is majority of the colors here are cool colors. There's some warmer colors happening, but for the most part this is a kind of a color scheme that highlights cool. And obviously you can make a color scheme out of anything you wish. Here we have some terms that we could, I think it's important that artists use a proper vocabulary when they're discussing art. Hue is really about the families of colors like reds and greens and blues and yellows. Cool, warm, we've talked about that. Saturation is the pureness of color. And when you add black and white, you kind of water down that saturation by either creating shades with black and tints with white. Shapes, a variety of different ways we can combine shapes. Here we have geometric shapes. We have curvilinear shapes, which here's the Guggenheim Museum in Bilbao, Spain. Mostly curves, straight lines. Organic shapes in this Gaudi building. And this is, organic things come from nature, right? So they're derived from nature, they're inspired by nature. Texture. Texture is a great way to create another type of visual interest. We have actual texture that you can feel and touch. Even this painting has actual texture if we wanted to touch it. You don't do that in a museum, but it's the kind of impasto texture from the paint that's creating that sort of surface, and that's what Van Gogh did a lot of. Sculpture would actually have an actual texture as well. Pattern can create wonderful kind of visual interest. Repeating patterns. This creates sort of you don't get really terribly bored looking at this. It's just kind of fascinating. It's a tessellation, right? The illusion of space. If you've taken a drawing class, you've talked a little bit about perspective and the illusion of space. Perspective is really relatively new, the discovery of how to take a three-dimensional kind of spatial idea and put it on a flat canvas. It's not until the Renaissance that artists really mastered the science of perspective. And here we have a drawing or a painting and a photograph of the same thing. It's the illusion of space. It's flat. So when we can create illusions of space in different ways. Martina Lopez is an artist that does use Photoshop to create these montages with photographs. And if you place human figures in front of one another and push them off into space and make them smaller and smaller, it looks like there is an illusion of deep space, right? And over